All right, so we want to go ahead and make a sourdough loaf of bread, and I figured I would do a video on my process since I get asked a few times how I make it. And so the very first step in making bread is actually getting all of your ingredients together. And for that, I really recommend a scale, doing weight measurements instead of volume measurements when it comes to your ingredients. Makes all of the difference in baking, especially in bread baking, when accuracy really matters for things. So I just have a simple scale that I can do grams in for all of my big ingredients. And then for my small ingredients, I actually have a smaller gram scale for when I do my salt ingredient as well, because I need to be able to get down to about 10 or so grams. But first step in actually making the bread, or this, I guess the second step in making the bread after weighing out all of your ingredients, is what's called an Autolyse time. And Autolyse is just a time that we give the flour and the water, just those two ingredients, time to sit, and it allows the flour to hydrate appropriately. This time frame can be anywhere from 20-30 minutes up to a few hours. I've been doing a 2-hour Autolyse. Might be a little long, but I've had pretty good success with it. So that's what I've kept going with. So currently this bread is a 73% hydration bread. That means that to the total volume, or to the total weight of flour, I have 73% water. So I have 500 grams total of flour. I have 100 grams of whole wheat, white whole wheat, and 400 grams of bread flour. So 73% of that is 365 grams of water. So I'm just going to go ahead and add in the flour here. This is, as I said, 100 grams of whole wheat. And then I'm actually going to take out the bowl here to add in the 400 grams of bread flour to my 365 grams of water. And then I'm just going to add on a paddle attachment to my stand mixer. We're just going to go ahead and mix this up on low speed until it all comes together and you don't see any dry clumps of flour. And then we are going to scrape the bowl down a little bit, the best that we can, and then put a towel over the bowl and let it just rest on the counter for about 2 hours. Okay, so here we are. We are 2 hours after the mixing for the Autolyse. You can kind of see the dough has certainly considerable more stretch now than it did before, which is all because that flour is hydrated. Now I need to actually add the leaven, or the actual sourdough part, to this bread, so we can go ahead and start mixing it. And for that, I'm just going to pop it on my scale here. I'm going to go ahead and get 100 grams of starter in here. My starter is a little past its prime. Starting this process a little later in the day than I typically would like. So I got about 106 grams in there. That's okay, I'm not gonna fuss about that. So we're gonna go ahead and attach the dough hook to this. We are going to mix it. Once it actually starts pulling away from the bowl, it actually starts to form into a ball, for about between 6 and 7 minutes. I'm going to be looking for a softer consistency to the dough, one that looks shiny and it doesn't stick to my hands or the sides of the bowl at all. So I'm going to go ahead and mix it until then. For me, it's typically between 6 and 7 minutes. So we'll go ahead and check in at the end of that process. So this is after about 6.5 minutes of mixing. I'm going to go ahead and cover this again and leave it for 30 minutes. And then we will come back and we are going to mix again, but adding in salt as well to this dough. All right, so here we are after 30 minutes of resting after that first mix. We can still see the dough looks pretty good, looks pretty shiny, and we can actually stretch it pretty decently here. We could actually pull a pretty decent window pane if we wanted to. So that's good. That shows that the dough's relaxed a little bit since mixing, as well as actually formed some pretty good dough structure during that first mix. I'm gonna go ahead and add 10 grams of salt onto the top of this dough. So I'm gonna go ahead and put it back in the mixer. I'm gonna go ahead and mix it again for another 6 to 7 minutes on medium-low speed. Once again, looking for a really smooth texture and consistency, glossy dough that definitely starts to pull away from the side of the bowl, and then one that obviously where the salt has actually dispersed through it. Okay, so this is after actually about just 6 minutes of mixing, and you can kind of see super soft, really glossy, shiny. So we're gonna go ahead and pop a cover on this and let it rest for another 30 minutes before the next step. All right, so it's been just about 30 minutes since the last step, and this step we're just gonna do a large stretch and fold to this dough, and then we're gonna place it back in the container again. So we're just gonna get this dough out of here. Go ahead and get a wet board scraper here. Pull it up, stretch, fold it back on itself. Come at 3 o'clock, pull up, stretch it over on itself. Do the same at 6 o'clock, and then do the same at 9 o'clock. There you go. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're just really stretching the dough and also starting to fold the layers in a little bit. So we're just gonna place this back in our bowl. We're gonna cover it, and we're gonna let it set for an hour this time before we come back, and we'll do another stretch when we come back as well. Okay, so it has been an hour since we did the big stretch and fold that was in the last clip. And now we need to do a lamination step. And this is in essence spreading the dough out over a large portion and then folding itself almost like a book or a box back on itself to really stretch out the dough as much as we can manage, and then fold it back so we actually start layering the dough a little bit and work towards bulk fermentation in this step. So the first thing is we need to get a kind of a large area to work in. I'm going to spray this down. This is just a bottle of plain water. We're just going to kind of spray it, and then we're going to go ahead and get the bowl back. We're going to kind of loosen this from the bowl. Like that. We're going to go ahead here and spray a little bit more and flip the dough out. So we're going to wet our hands. Then we're just going to stretch this dough out into whatever shape you like. Probably in a rectangle I have found works best. And we're just trying to evenly stretch it out across. I believe this little piece of counter is about 2 by 2, 2 foot by 2 foot. So we can stretch this dough out quite a bit. It's not tearing, it's pretty workable and soft and stretchy, which is pretty impressive for dough. All right, so we could probably stretch it out a little more than that. It does get a little harder to fold over as it gets a little bigger, so I'm pretty happy with that. And we're just going to fold the right over in a third and the left over in a third, and then we're going to fold the long ways in half as well. So we'll just go ahead and pick this up here and fold it over. Pick this side up, fold it over. And then we're going to go ahead and pick up this top half, fold it down half, pick up the bottom half, fold it up, and then kind of pick this up and stretch it as we fold it over. I'm going to go ahead and get this bowl back, and I'm going to put just the littlest bit of olive oil in it. Put a little in there. We're just going to kind of rub that around with our hands. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and pick up the dough here. We'll place it into the bowl. just like that. And we'll go ahead and let it set for another hour before the next step. Okay, so it has been an hour since we did that big lamination. And you can see there's been a few fermentation bubbles that have popped up in the dough. And we're going to just do a simple fold. And instead of stretching and folding the dough towards us, we're actually going to pick up the dough and tuck it under itself a few times. This helps to even out the temperature in the dough, and then also helps to make sure that all the fermentation is more evenly spread throughout the dough as well. And I'm just going to pick the dough up and fold it under itself, turn it around 180 degrees, pick it up, fold it under itself, pop any of the big ginormous bubbles, and then turn it 90 degrees, pick it up, tuck it under itself, turn it 180 degrees, pick it up, fold it under itself, and there we go. So I'm just going to cover this again, let it sit for an hour. I'm going to do that again in an hour, and we will check in then. Here we are again after another hour from that first fold. So dough has risen definitely have more fermentation bubbles going on. So we're going to do the exact same process of just folding the dough under itself, putting a towel back over it, and letting it sit for another hour. Not going to bore you with that step. You've seen it before, so we will catch up at the next step. Okay, so it has actually been an hour and a half since the last clip. I decided to skip the last fold. The dough was starting to show pretty good signs of bulk fermentation. I think my starter has been a little bit more active recently. And so I kind of err on the side of not quite fully bulk fermented at the best case. Is better than over bulk fermenting, because we want to still leave a little bit of life left in the dough for overnight in the fridge and for baking the next day. But signs that I look for are obviously having some additional volume in the dough. Then it also has a little bit of a dome shape to the top of it. It isn't just a flat blob of dough. It has a little bit of a dome, and then obviously bubbles showing that there is some fermentation that's happened. So I've just dusted the top of this with flour. I've also dusted my counter just a little bit with flour. So I would argue that shaping is the most important part of bread making. It's just something that I feel like you have to nail, or when you come to bake the bread, it just doesn't come out the way that it should. So gonna go and do what I do for shaping. First thing, I just kind of break this dough a little bit from around the sides. It lets a little bit of flour fall down along the sides of the dough to keep it from sticking as badly. And then I'm just gonna flip this straight out here onto my bench. I'm gonna get a little bit more flour. I'm gonna dump this out. And that looks pretty good. The dough actually is holding a little bit of its shape and its roundness. It isn't just spewing out everywhere. So that is also another good sign that good fermentation has happened and that we have a decent amount of strength in the dough already. So I'm just gonna go ahead, use my bench scraper to kind of get the sides of the dough a little loose. And then for shaping, I'm gonna fold right side over a third, left side over a third, and then I'm going to stitch all the way down the loaf, and then I'm gonna roll the loaf up. So I'll go ahead and do that now. I just use my bench scraper to get it in my hands. Kind of come over a third. Do that again on this side. Bring it up a third. And then I just stitch all the way down the dough, because the goal of shaping is to create tension on the top side of your loaf. I'll stitch a little bit more up here. It didn't quite stick the way I wanted it to. So it kind of looks like a braid. And then I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start rolling it. and I kind of push the dough out and away from me as well, just to help give it that a little bit additional strength on the top. So I do tend to like to pinch on the inside and then kind of pinch the dough together to kind of create a seal on that outside the best that I can. And also on this side, kind of push in and pinch. And I'm going to scrape some of the flour away because I want to have a little bit of a drier surface. And then I am going to go ahead and try and tighten this ball up a little bit. So the next trick is I'm going to let this sit for a little bit, and that lets the bottom of the dough seal as it sits on the countertop. And then I'm just going to dust it a little on the top with some rice flour. I'm going to put it in the banneton, and then I'm going to let it sit in the fridge. It's currently 4:30 in the afternoon. We started this process at 8 o'clock this morning with the Autolyse, and then I'm going to bake tomorrow morning at about 7 o'clock in the morning. So it's going to sit for whatever it is, 15-16 hours before it gets baked, and really allows the flavor to develop in the crust. Okay, so here we are the next morning. It's about 7:20. I'm gonna go ahead and bake. So I bake in a combo cooker. Easiest way that I found is to dust the bottom of the dough with a little bit of rice flour and get out my pizza peel. And then I just invert the dough onto the pizza peel. I'm gonna let that sit for just a second as I get my combo cooker out of the oven. Have the oven preheated to 500 degrees. And I think the combo cooker is about 515 degrees or so. And then I'm gonna go ahead and pull off the banneton. Make sure the dough is loose, which it is. I dust it with a little bit of rice flour. Smooth it around. This just helps get a nice even coating of rice flour for when it's out of the oven. And we're gonna go ahead and cut it. And I just typically do one cut right down the center. And I go like that. Go ahead and put on my glove. And I'll go ahead and put this in the combo cooker. Pop it in the oven. I cooked covered for 25 minutes and then uncovered at about 435 degrees until it's to my liking of brownness. That's typically about 17 minutes or so. Okay, so it's been 25 minutes or so here. Let's go ahead and see what we got. Oh yeah, that looks good. Okay, so it's actually been just about 20 minutes or so in the oven since we took off the lid for final browning, and looks like we ended up doing pretty decently well. Pretty good oven spring out of that, and good color all around. Looks like I could have scored just a little bit better, but overall pretty happy with that. And let it cool down for a few hours before you cut into it for best results.